Today, we will be discussing the case of Andrea Yates, one of the most shocking and controversial criminal cases in recent history. Andrea Yates made headlines in 2001 when she drowned her 5 young children in the family bathtub in their home in Texas. Her actions left the nation stunned and raised many questions about postpartum depression, psychosis, and the insanity defense. In this video, we'll take a closer look at the events leading up to the tragic deaths of the Yates children, the trial that followed, and the legal and ethical debates that emerged from the case. We'll examine the conflicting opinions of mental health experts and explore the challenges of prosecuting a case that raises complex questions about mental illness and criminal responsibility. Andrea Yates was born into a middle-class family in Houston in 1964. She graduated from high school as class valedictorian and earned a nursing degree. After she married and had her first child, she quit her job. Andrea had a history of mental illness in her family, but remained undiagnosed and untreated. Andrea and her husband, Rusty, had Bible-inspired notions about family and motherhood. They met a preacher named Michael Woroniecki, who preached austerity and subservience of women to men. The Yateses decided to live in a bus that Woroniecki had converted for his religious crusade and sold to them. Andrea had violent visions and heard Satan speak to her. Woroniecki and his wife wrote letters to Andrea telling her that she was wicked and evil. They emphasized that people were accountable for children, and if the mother was going to hell, so would the children. The pressures of having 4 children, homeschooling them with Christian-only texts, living in a cramped bus, and caring for her ill father took a toll on Andrea. On June 20th, 2001, Rusty Yates received a phone call from his wife, Andrea, who told him to come home because she had done something to their children. When he arrived 15 minutes later, he found the police and ambulances at their home in Houston, Texas. Rusty was told that he couldn't go inside and had to wait outside while the police worked. Soon after, he collapsed in disbelief as he watched his wife being led away in handcuffs. Inside the house, the police found that Andrea had drowned all 5 of their children, 4 of them on a bed and the oldest boy in the bathtub. Andrea appeared emotionless as she confessed to the murders, telling police that she was a bad mother and deserved punishment. The children, aged between 6 months to 7 years, were named after figures from the Bible: Noah, John, Luke, Paul, and Mary. After killing them, Andrea left them in place for 3 hours to await the medical examiner's van. When questioned by the police, Andrea admitted to killing her children and said she did it because she was a bad mother. She was charged with capital murder for intentionally causing the deaths of 3 of her children. Although she had a history of depression and had been hospitalized for attempted suicide, there was no indication in the initial report that she suffered from mental illness. Her husband, Rusty, however, claimed that she had suffered bouts of serious depression since the birth of their 4th child 2 years earlier. Rusty believed it was not his wife who had killed the children, but her illness. In June 2001, Andrea Yates appeared before Judge Belinda Hill, and the prosecutor, Kaylin Williford, stated the case against her. Andrea quietly said that she did not have an attorney, and the judge appointed Bob Scott as her public defender. Rusty looked for an attorney and contacted George Parnham, a family friend who agreed to get involved. Wendell Odom came on the case to assist Parnham, and he believed Andrea might not be competent to stand trial. Dr. Lucy Puryear, a psychiatrist, diagnosed Andrea with postpartum psychosis, which is rare and less understood. A psychiatric examination was ordered for Andrea, and a psychiatrist asked her what she thought would happen to the children. She indicated that she believed God would take them up, and they would have gone to hell if she had not taken their lives. The judge issued a gag order on the day of the children's funeral. Time reporter Michelle McCallop attended the funeral, and Rusty gave a half-hour eulogy that addressed each child's personality and offered family stories. By June 28th, a staff writer for ABC News predicted what might happen to Yates, stating that juries have a difficult time sending a mother to lethal gas or the electric chair, and there were 8 other women on death row, yet approximately 180 children are murdered annually by their mothers. Andrea Yates was indicted for capital murder on July 31, 2001. She was eligible for the death penalty due to having killed more than one person, including a child under the age of 6. On August 8th, Yates entered an insanity defense and was even thinner than before due to medication. Her competency was debated, with the defense claiming she was not competent to stand trial and the prosecution claiming she was. The prosecution sought the death penalty. On September 18th, a jury selection began for the competency proceeding, and 11 women and 1 man were selected. Yates's attorneys filed extensive documentation on her mental illness history. Her competency was debated further, with both sides bringing in experts. Dr. Gerald Harris testified that Yates had shown signs of psychosis and hallucinations, believing Satan possessed her and wanting to be executed to destroy Satan. Dr. Lauren Marangel testified about changes in the brain during psychological states and provided a map of Yates's psychotic episodes since 1999. She concluded that Yates would be competent in the future with continued treatment. The prosecutors took their witnesses, mostly prison staff, over the 13 points involved in assessing competency. Dr. Steve Rubinzer, who had spent over 10 hours with Yates, testified that her comprehension had improved over time and that she did pass the state's competency stipulations. However, he believed that Yates had a serious mental illness and her psychotic features were only in partial remission. On September 24th, the jury deemed Yates competent to stand trial. The defense quickly prepared motions, and both sides continued to investigate Yates's mental health history, marriage quality, and the factors involved in her decision to kill her children. Andrea's lawyers, Parnham and Odom, filed pretrial motions in October, including a request to reconsider a procedure in the Texas Criminal Code that prohibited jurors from learning that a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity was not an outright acquittal. They also wanted Yates's confession thrown out and declared the insanity plea unconstitutional. In November, the prosecution's psychiatrist, Dr. Park Dietz, interviewed Yates and recorded their conversation. Yates told him that Satan was inside her, giving her directions, and that she killed her children to ensure their place in heaven. The defense fought the capital murder charge in December, but failed, and the judge ruled that Andrea's 911 call and confession were admissible. Jury selection began on January 7, 2002, and 8 women and 4 men were seated, all death-qualified and with some background in psychology. The defense had to prove that Yates had a mental disease or defect that prohibited her from understanding that what she had done was wrong, despite her confession that she knew it was wrong. They had to educate the jury on mental illness and stereotypes and present a strong case. The defense painted a vivid picture of Andrea as a stay-at-home mom who suffered from major depression and was prescribed Zoloft but did not take it regularly. She experienced psychotic hallucinations and had attempted suicide twice. She was hospitalized and diagnosed with major depression and prescribed several antidepressants. Andrea became pregnant with her 5th child, despite warnings from doctors to have no more children. When her father died, she stopped functioning and became malnourished. Her husband took her to the Devereaux, Texas treatment network, where psychiatrist Mohammed Saeed put her on Risperdal instead of Haldol, which was unnecessary since he did not observe any psychosis. Andrea was discharged into her husband's care, but was soon hospitalized again. When she started to eat and shower, she was sent home with outpatient therapy. One day she filled the tub and her mother-in-law asked why. She responded, "In case I need it." Rusty took Andrea back to the doctor and told him that she was talking about Satan and that someone needed to be with her all the time. Saeed suggested reducing the dosage of Risperdal and increasing the dosage of Effexor. Andrea was discharged, and Rusty went back to work. When he came back, Andrea had drowned all 5 of their children in the bathtub. Andrea's case became a high-profile arena for the battle of medical experts. The prosecution claimed that Yates had knowingly committed the murders, while the defense argued that she was legally insane due to postpartum depression with psychotic features. The primary question in the case was whether Yates had killed her children while in a state of disabling psychosis or had knowingly done it to escape a life she hated or to punish her husband. During the trial, the prosecution presented evidence such as the 911 call, testimony of police officers who responded to the scene, and autopsy reports from medical examiners. Jurors heard about how one child had strands of his mother's hair clamped in his little fist. Andrea's mother-in-law testified that she was nearly catatonic, staring into space, and did not think she was aware of what she was doing when she killed the children. The prosecution entered the children's pajamas into evidence to prove that Yates had knowingly murdered her children. The defense argued that Yates did not know what she was doing because of her severe and long-standing mental illness. However, the medication had stabilized Yates over the 8 months since the crimes had occurred, and she appeared to be normal in court. The prosecution rested after 3 days, and the defense called its first witness. During the trial, Andrea's defense team argued that she was not guilty by reason of insanity. They presented evidence from psychiatrists that Yates suffered from schizophrenia and believed that Satan was speaking to her and her children through cartoons, which urged her to kill her children to save them from eternal damnation. Yates had also attempted suicide and had a history of hallucinations after the birth of her first child. The defense team also argued that Yates's husband, Rusty, did not fully understand the extent of her illness and assumed that doctors were doing everything they could to help her. They also accused one of her doctors of altering her medical records to protect himself. The defense team called upon several psychiatrists to testify that Yates was incapable of knowing the nature of her actions due to her severe psychosis. One psychiatrist described Yates's decision to kill her children as altruistic, as she believed it was the only way to save their eternal souls. Dr. Park Dietz, a threat assessment expert from California, was called as a rebuttal witness after the defense presented its case in the Andrea Yates trial. He was known for simplifying complex psychological issues for juries and used a PowerPoint presentation to argue that although Yates was seriously ill, she knew what she was doing was wrong when she killed her children. Dietz blamed others, notably Yates's husband Rusty, for not following medical advice to leave her alone with children due to her severe mental illness. He also pointed out that Yates did not act like a mother who believed she was saving her children from Satan and had kept her plan a secret from others. Yates's actions and statements showed that she knew killing her children was wrong and deserved the death penalty. Dietz suggested that an episode of the TV show Law and Order may have inspired Yates to kill her children, indicating premeditation. Dietz was the final witness before both sides summed up their cases for the jury. After a 3-week trial, the jury returned a guilty verdict within 3 hours. Many people debated whether she should receive the death penalty or life in prison. The defense team later discovered that a significant piece of evidence used against Yates was false. A mistrial was requested, but the judge denied it. In the penalty phase, the jury chose to sentence Yates to life in prison instead of the death penalty. Rusty Yates, Andrea's husband, believed that the mental health system had failed his family and set up a website to raise awareness of mental illness. Yates was sent to a psychiatric prison in Texas, where she would be eligible for parole in 2041. Many believed that Andrea's husband, Rusty, and doctors were also to blame. The Harris County DA investigated Rusty for disregarding doctors' instructions, but no charges were filed. Rusty believed the doctors and hospitals that did not treat Andrea properly were most responsible and considered a lawsuit. Ultimately, no investigation was conducted. Andrea's case highlights the difficulty in getting juries to understand postpartum depression. Unlike in other countries, including Canada, Britain, and Australia, where postpartum depression is recognized as a legal defense, American law emphasizes free choice and personal responsibility. As a result, mentally ill mothers may not receive adequate recognition or treatment. In contrast, Yvonne Rodriguez, who killed one child because of demons, was acquitted. Mental health professionals say the lack of clear standards in court for dealing with mentally ill mothers makes it challenging for juries to understand their condition, which can be temporary and treatable. In January 2005, an appeals court overturned Andrea's conviction and ordered a new trial. The court's attention was drawn to the testimony of Dr. Park Dietz, who allegedly made a false statement that figured into the way the case was presented to the jury. The prosecution argued that Yates had seen an episode of Law and Order in which a woman had drowned her children and feigned mental illness, inspiring Yates to commit the same crime. However, it was later discovered that no such episode ever aired. It is unclear who was to blame for allowing the incorrect testimony to become part of the trial record and jury deliberations, but the appeals court considered it legally problematic, especially since it was mentioned in the closing argument. The court ruled that there was a reasonable likelihood that Dietz's false testimony could have affected the judgment of the jury and affected the substantial rights of Yates. The prosecution insisted that they did not knowingly rely on incorrect testimony and argued that Dietz's testimony, even if wrong, was not material to the case, as they had other ways of showing that Yates had planned to kill her children. The appeals court agreed, but noted that the prosecution's reference to the testimony in making its case may have influenced the jury's perception. Yates's mental illness was well documented, and she had a history of seeking treatment for depression and psychosis. After the appeals court decision, she was eventually found not guilty by reason of insanity and was committed to a state mental hospital. Yates's case brought attention to postpartum psychosis and the problems with the insanity defense. Legal speculation suggests that Yates may be reassigned to a private mental institution instead of prison, where she can be properly evaluated. Yates's husband Rusty filed for divorce, and those who care for her indicate that she is still mentally unstable. Yates tried to kill herself in 2004 by refusing to eat and was hospitalized. Do you agree with the not guilty verdict in the retrial? Let me know in the comments. I would love to hear what you have to say. Also, consider giving this video a like if you liked it. That really helps with the algorithm. Additionally, consider subscribing to the channel for more true crime. Till next time, signing off. This has been Christina.